Alabama, let's read some more about less. We're here with Ryan Blazer from testmyhome.com. We're talking today about a bunch of invisible toxins in our environment, the chemicals, the fragrances, the non-native EMF. We're talking about products that might be toxic to us and paint and furniture that can be toxic to us. And I want to talk about one thing. This is going to sound hyperbolic. And I try to avoid this type of superlative or this type of hyperbole, but I think it makes a lot of sense to talk about this right now. We're going to talk about earthing or grounding for a moment. And so I'm combining the More About Less segment and the Added Value segment on this week's podcast, because if I had to name one thing that I've gotten the most value from in my life, it's grounding at home, earthing at home. There's a company called earthing.com. Clint Ober's been on this podcast. We'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. We did an entire episode about earthing with him. Now, I have this autoimmune disease which creates intense inflammation in my body, especially react to certain foods that I eat. But even without food, I will often wake up with just tremendous inflammation in my body. So much so that there were times a few years ago, before I stumbled into grounding or earthing, I realized that, oh, wait a minute. I don't think I've really touched the earth much over the course of almost 40 years. And I realized that, oh, these rubber-soled shoes that we're all walking around with have inadvertently disconnected us from the earth. Rubber-soled shoes were invented in the late 50s. And so since 1960, most of us have accidentally disconnected from the earth, from the natural grounding. Because before that, we would wear shoes, but they would have leather soles. And so you'd still have some level of grounding, some connection to the earth. We took that away, not knowing there might be a potential downside to that. And so I started walking barefoot on the beach more. I started walking barefoot outside. When I lived in this neighborhood, I would walk through West Hollywood barefoot even. And I recognized that the inflammation in my body, I started noticing how less inflamed I became. I said, how can I ground more? How can I even ground when I'm sleeping? Well, there was a way for me to do that. I bought an earthing mat from earthing.com. Not a sponsor. Advertisements suck, but it's the thing I've gotten the most value from. I can say this with very little doubt. I likely would not be here today if it weren't for the amount of earthing/grounding that I've been able to do, both naturally in natural environments, barefoot on the beach, in the ocean, or just walking barefoot on the grass, but also coupling that with when I'm indoors, having a earthing mat that helps relieve some of my symptoms. And I wanted to share some of the science behind this because also Ryan Blazer, he illuminated maybe one shocking downside to grounding in the home. And it set off all these light bulbs, some red light bulbs above my head. And I started thinking like, oh, wait, okay. So while earthing has been tremendously valuable to me, and I've recommended it to many hundreds of thousands of people on this podcast and close friends, I've given it to everyone I can because it's helped me so much. And I've seen so many people benefit from it, especially people with autoimmune diseases. A lot of women with endometriosis or people who have irritable bowel syndrome. The earthing or grounding has eliminated or radically reduced the amount of inflammation in their bodies. And now we know why. Here's an NIH study called The Effects of Grounding, Earthing, on Inflammation, the Immune System, Wound Healing, and Prevention and Treatment of Chronic Inflammatory and Autoimmune Diseases. Alabama, would you read the abstract from this study, and then we'll put a link to the entire study in the show notes for folks who want to dive deep.
Multidisciplinary research has revealed that electrically conductive contact of the human body with the surface of the earth, grounding or earthing, produces intriguing effects on physiology and health. Such effects relate to inflammation, immune responses, wound healing, and prevention and treatment of chronic inflammatory and autoimmune diseases. The purpose of this report is twofold: to 1. Inform researchers about what appears to be a new perspective to the study of inflammation, and 2. Alert researchers that the length of time and degree, resistance to ground, of grounding of experimental animals is an important but usually overlooked factor that can influence outcomes of studies of inflammation, wound healing, and tumorigenesis. Specifically, grounding an organism produces measurable differences in the concentrations of white blood cells, cytokines, and other molecules involved in the inflammatory response. We present several hypotheses to explain observed effects based on the current research results and our understanding of the electronic aspects of cell and tissue physiology, cell biology, biophysics, and biochemistry. An experimental injury to muscles, known as delayed onset muscle soreness, has been used to monitor the immune response under grounded versus ungrounded conditions. Grounding reduces pain and alters the numbers of circulating neutrophils and lymphocytes, and also affects various circulating chemical factors related to inflammation.
Let me try to put this in layman's terms real quick, Ryan. Grounding has radically reduced my inflammation. However, when you came over to my house and we were doing the inspection around my house, and you noticed I have grounding things all over the place and they plug right into the wall. And while the grounding mat itself is not electrical, it's plugging into an electrical outlet. And in some cases, we may experience electrical interference with our grounding equipment inside the house.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, no, you said that perfect.
Well, let's talk about the summary of this study here. We'll put a link to the entire study in the show notes so you can read the whole thing over at theminimalists.com/podcast. This is the summary of findings to date, Alabama.
Grounding appears to improve sleep, normalize the day-night cortisol rhythm, reduce pain, reduce stress, shift the autonomic nervous system from sympathetic toward parasympathetic activation, increase heart rate variability, speed wound healing, and reduce blood viscosity. A summary has been published in the Journal of Environmental and Public Health.
So those are a lot of benefits. And I've experienced most of these benefits, and I've seen thousands of other people experience these benefits. There's so many case studies, so many anecdotal reports, which to me are often some of the most compelling when you have someone who is just suffering tremendously, like I was with inflammation, and they finally find something that helps. And yet, I also want to be honest that there could be a potential downside here. No downside to earthing at all. You can go outside, take your shoes off, put your feet in the grass, or go swim in the ocean or a lake, and the grounding effect of that, or the earthing effect of that, is tremendous. However, when I'm plugged into an earthing mat right now into the wall, can you talk to me about the electronic interference that might show up when we are plugging directly into the wall?
Yeah. So there's something called dirty electricity. This is kind of like a layman's term, but it's talking about line interference. And so on the electrical wires, we have the 60 cycle vibration of the hot wire, and that's what's feeding the electricity into the different components we plug into it. On top of that, though, we have interference, and that can come from capacitors, motors, switch mode power supplies, refrigerators clicking on and off. Every time that happens, we get little spikes, and it can spikes positive, spikes negative, and we call that line interference, and that can negatively affect us much more than just the electric field itself. It's more biologically active. Now, the problem is that the ground wire runs right next to the neutral wire and the hot wire all the way back to the power panel. So we get some inductive overlay back and forth, some inductive coupling, that they call it. Back in the power panel, though, the neutral and the ground wire are bonded together. So they're physically touching each other. So whatever's going to be on the neutral wire can also show up on the ground wire. From there, it's grounded typically to water pipe, or it's grounded into the ground itself with a ground rod. So even though we are physically connected to Earth, and there is an electrical connection through Earth, we also have on top of that small fluctuations of current, small dirty electricity, if you will. Now, when we connect ourselves to that, those small fluctuations can also enter onto the body, which we measured at your house with a meter, showed how even when you're touching it versus not touching it, or when it's plugged in, that we're measuring these small vibrations, dirty electricity getting onto the body.
And what's the problem with that?
The problem is that those fluctuations can biologically affect us.
And so what you were telling me yesterday is that perhaps for me, the benefits outweigh the cost. However, there is also a way to be grounded in your home, to extend an extension cord to the earth and bypass the electrical system. Can you talk a bit about that?
Right. And again, it comes back to ancestrally. How were things 500 years ago? Everybody walked around on the ground, maybe with moccasins or sandals. We had dirt floor. We were touching the ground a lot more, laying on the floor, sleeping on the ground. And so the earth itself has a resonance called the Schumann frequency. It's somewhere around 7 hertz. And it's got that electrical vibration to it. Now, our bodies are in tune with that. Our bodies resonate with that. And so when we're physically touching the earth, our electrons will neutralize, and we're more in tune with that, the heartbeat of the earth, so to speak. So that's good, and that's positive, and that's where all these benefits come from. So ultimately, we want to be connected with the earth as much as possible, and we do that by physical connection. Now, we're kind of cheating it a little bit or skipping it a little bit when we plug into the electrical, because that has to travel through the whole circuitry of the house, through the power panel, and then go to the box. From the ground on its journey all the way back to us, it's picking up the interference from the circuits of the house. And that's where we still get the benefit of grounding, or earthing. We're still connected to earth, but we're getting all that interference on top of it. So it'd be much better to place our own grounding rod in the ground away from the electrical system, and just don't tie into the electrical system at all. This is not a good idea to tie into the electrical grid of our house if we can avoid it. If we can physically connect to earth, it's better. If you can't, use the outlet and see how you feel. Some people feel worse, some people feel a lot better, and it all depends on how much interference is on the line. And depending on where you are in the country or the world, some places have a lot of interference, some places have small interference. So plug it in and see how you feel. But you're still going to get the benefits from the earthing. You just have the added line exposure on top of it, the dirty electricity.
And so what I'm doing in my house short term is I'm literally running a grounding rod out the window into the ground, and then connecting that to the mat that I have on my bed, or the mat that I have on my chair at my desk, or you can wherever, like I'm sitting on a grounding earthing mat right now. And then for our added value, Malabama, you want to bring those patches over here to me. So the easiest way to do this, by the way, is you don't have to have some elaborate pad or a big, TK, you have one for your mattress now. I know Sean, Danny, and Malabama, they all have one on their mattress. And you don't have to go that route, because that's several $100s to buy that. You can get literally grounding patches, put 1 or 2 on your feet, on the bottom of your feet, because that is where we really absorb those negative electrons, right, from the earth. And so you can ground yourself in bed at night, or just when you're sitting on the couch and you've got your blue blocking glasses on and you're watching your old 1998 NBA Finals reruns, because you're a real masochist. And you can ground that way, and you can plug right into the outlet. But I am now going to just run the ground rod right out the window. And this is how Clint Ober, who started earthing.com, started anyway. When he started doing these tests, it wasn't plugging in. There was no way to plug into the grounded outlet. He just ran a grounding rod out the window and then tied a little wire around his toe and said, "Oh, I sleep better when I am grounded." It's like an extension cord to the earth. And so I'm going to do that short term. Long term, I want to wire the house so that I have a few outlets strategically placed throughout the house so I can plug right into them, and they're completely separate from the electrical system, at least 24 inches away from any of the electrical wires. So I'm not getting any of that dirty electricity, any of that interference, but I'm still getting all the benefits from grounding or earthing. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, you did that beautifully. You laid it out perfect. Yeah.
So the grounding patches have helped me out a lot. You can find them at earthing.com. Again, not an ad. Advertisements suck. I pay for my own patches as well, but they do such a great job with the products they create. And Clint is independently wealthy that he doesn't need to sell you a bunch of products. What he did is he realized there was a huge hole in the marketplace. There were a lot of people who were selling so-called grounding equipment. It just wasn't very reliable or didn't work well or disintegrated pretty quickly. And he said, I'm going to find a better way to do that. So earthing has really helped me. And I've seen it help a lot of people with autoimmune conditions, but I've seen it help people also who are just like, my sleep's a little bit off. And what did it say here, Alabama? It reduces stress, shifts the nervous system from sympathetic toward parasympathetic, increases heart rate variability, which is really important, something you can track, speeds wound healing. That's something else that was so fascinating. In this study, they have pictures of people who have a wound, and then they ground the wound by putting a couple patches right next to the wound. And it's like Wolverine, the way that these people heal. And it's so shocking to me that we don't see more of this. And I think we will. In about a decade or less, we'll start to see hospitals using earthing techniques in conjunction with traditional Western medicine to speed up healing so that people recover much more quickly. I hope you enjoyed that highlight from the Minimalist Private Podcast. If you'd like another highlight, check out this video. If you'd like to watch the minimal episode, check out this video. Or if you'd like to dive deep into full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, head on over to Patreon. The link is in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.